In 1587, more than 100 English settlers established a colony on Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. 3 years later, when supplies finally arrived from England, the settlement was abandoned. No bodies, no signs of struggle, only a single word carved into a tree: CROATOAN. The fate of the lost colony of Roanoke remains one of the oldest and most haunting mysteries in American history. The story of Roanoke begins in the late 16th century, during England's first attempts to establish a permanent foothold in the New World. In 1587, more than 100 men, women and children set sail under the leadership of Governor John White. They arrived on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina, with high hopes of building a thriving English colony. Unlike earlier expeditions, this group included families. The settlers believed they were laying the foundation of a new society, not just a temporary outpost. Among them was White's own daughter, Eleanor Dare, who gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. For many, her birth symbolized the promise of a new beginning. But life on Roanoke was harsh. Supplies dwindled quickly, relations with local tribes were tense, and the settlers struggled to adapt to their unfamiliar surroundings. By late 1587, it was clear that without aid from England, the colony might not survive. Governor White sailed back across the Atlantic to secure supplies, leaving behind his family and the settlers with promises to return quickly. Fate, however, intervened. England was preparing for war with Spain, and White's return was delayed by years. By the time he managed to set sail again, it was 1590, 3 long years since he had left Roanoke. As his ship approached the island, White's heart was heavy with both hope and dread. What he found when he landed would baffle the world for centuries. When John White finally stepped ashore in August of 1590, the scene before him was nothing like what he had left behind. The settlement was silent, its houses dismantled, and its fortifications in disrepair. There were no signs of battle, no evidence of disease or mass death, only an eerie emptiness that hung over the land. White searched desperately for clues. On a tree near the entrance to the colony, he found the letters CRO carved into the bark. At the main fort, he discovered the word CROATOAN etched deeply into a post. This was no random scrawl, it was a deliberate mark, and White believed it was a message from the settlers. CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island, home to a Native American tribe known to be friendly with the English. The discovery gave White hope. He thought the colonists might have relocated there, waiting for him, but fierce storms battered the coast, making it impossible for his ships to sail south. With supplies dwindling and his crew unwilling to risk further delay, White was forced to abandon the search. He returned to England heartbroken, never to see his daughter, granddaughter, or the settlers again. The mystery only deepened. No bones, graves, or personal belongings were found. It was as if the colony had simply melted away into the wilderness. The word CROATOAN remained the only clue, a single carved word that has echoed through history as one of the greatest riddles of early America. In the years after White's return to England, the fate of the Roanoke settlers became a subject of endless speculation. Many believed they had moved to CROATOAN Island, as the carvings suggested, and possibly integrated with the friendly CROATOAN tribe. Later reports from explorers described sightings of Europeans living among native peoples, hinting that the settlers might have survived through assimilation. Others painted a darker picture. Some theorized that the colonists were attacked by hostile tribes, their remains hidden or lost to time. A few suggested they may have succumbed to starvation and disease, abandoning the settlement in search of food, only to perish in the wilderness. The absence of graves or skeletal remains, however, kept these theories in doubt. As decades passed, stories emerged of English-looking children among Native American groups, blonde hair, grey eyes, and European features that seemed out of place. These tales fueled the belief that the Roanoke settlers had merged with indigenous tribes, their bloodline surviving even if the colony itself had vanished. Yet none of the stories could be confirmed. No artifacts were definitively traced back to the missing colonists. Each account was based on second-hand reports, fueled by rumor and imagination. Still, they kept the mystery alive, shaping Roanoke into more than just a failed settlement. It became a legend, an unsolved disappearance that blurred the line between history and myth. The carved word CROATOAN remained the key, but without proof, it was little more than a tantalizing whisper from the past. As the mystery lingered, new theories emerged that reached beyond ordinary explanations. Some suggested the settlers were victims of Spanish forces who at the time patrolled the Atlantic and sought to crush England's attempts at colonization. A secret raid, they argued, might explain the disappearance without leaving survivors or evidence behind. Others believed the colonists had attempted to sail back to England on their own, constructing small boats from the remains of their settlement. If so, the vast Atlantic would have claimed them quickly, their fragile craft no match for storms and tides. Still, no wreckage was ever discovered, and no trace of their journey was recorded. Over time, the story of Roanoke began to acquire supernatural undertones. Some whispered that the word CROATOAN was not a clue, but a curse. In later centuries, the word appeared in chilling contexts, etched into a tree where the infamous pirate Blackbeard once anchored, scribbled in the journal of Edgar Allan Poe before his mysterious death, and linked to strange disappearances throughout folklore. The name itself became entangled with fear, mystery, and the unknown. Historians, however, remained divided. Some insisted that the simplest explanation was assimilation with local tribes, while others maintained that starvation, disease, or violence had wiped out the colony. Yet the lack of concrete evidence kept the mystery alive. Roanoke was more than a question of survival. It had become a canvas for speculation, where each generation painted its own theories upon the silence of history. By the early 1600s, when the Jamestown colony was founded, rumors of Roanoke still haunted English settlers. Reports trickled in from explorers and traders who claimed to have seen Europeans living among native tribes further inland. Some swore that the lost colonists had intermarried and raised children, leaving behind descendants who carried both English and indigenous blood. Captain John Smith, leader of Jamestown, recorded accounts of native peoples who spoke of white settlers living nearby. He even heard of villages where people had European-style clothing and features. Yet every attempt to locate these groups failed, leaving only stories without proof. Later, colonist William Strecky reported hearing of English captives forced to work for tribes and eventually killed. His grim account painted a picture of survivors who may have met a violent end. These conflicting reports deepened the uncertainty. Had the Roanoke settlers been welcomed, enslaved, or slaughtered? Archaeological digs centuries later uncovered tantalizing clues, fragments of English pottery found on Hatteras Island, believed to be Croatoan and near Chesapeake settlements. These artifacts suggested some level of survival, but they could not confirm whether they belonged to the Roanoke settlers or later English traders. The silence of records, the absence of bodies, and the scattering of ambiguous artifacts meant no single theory could claim certainty. Roanoke's fate remained just out of reach, close enough to glimpse in fragments, but forever hidden behind the veil of time. As centuries passed, Roanoke transformed from a historical puzzle into a cultural legend. Writers, historians, and storytellers used the mystery to reflect fears of the unknown and the fragility of human survival. The word CROATOAN became iconic, etched into the imagination of generations who wondered what it truly meant. In the 19th century, romanticized histories portrayed the lost colony as tragic victims of a harsh wilderness, while others imagined them as trailblazers who integrated peacefully with native tribes. The ambiguity allowed each storyteller to shape the narrative, making Roanoke as much myth as fact. By the 20th century, the case had become fertile ground for speculation. Some fringe theories suggested the colonists were victims of supernatural forces, vanished by curses, spirits, or even alien intervention. These ideas, while sensational, highlighted the enduring power of the mystery. In the absence of answers, imagination filled the void. Serious scholars, however, continued to pursue evidence. Archaeological digs uncovered European-style tools and ceramics on Hatteras Island, hinting that at least some colonists may have relocated there. DNA studies have even been proposed to trace possible descendants among native communities. Yet none of these efforts have provided definitive proof. Roanoke remains a paradox. Too much evidence exists to say the settlers simply vanished without a trace, yet not enough exists to explain their fate with certainty. This tension between fragments of truth and the vast silence of history is what gives the story its haunting power. By the late 20th century, the lost colony of Roanoke had become a fixture of American folklore. Museums, television programs, and novels revisited the story, each retelling adding new layers of mystery. Tourists flocked to Roanoke Island, drawn to the site where more than 100 men, women, and children had disappeared without a trace. The island became not only a historical landmark, but also a stage for imagination. The story's endurance lay in its gaps. With no graves, no documents, and only the single carved word CROATOAN, the fate of the settlers was left open-ended. Some embraced the hopeful theory of assimilation, picturing the colonists thriving within native communities. Others gravitated toward darker explanations: massacre, disease, or betrayal. Popular culture leaned heavily into the supernatural. Roanoke appeared in horror stories, television dramas, and even paranormal lore. The settlers were cast as victims of curses, spirits, or otherworldly forces. Each fictional portrayal blurred the line further between history and myth, ensuring that the lost colony would never be remembered as a simple failure of survival. Even serious research often fueled the mystery. Each artifact uncovered, each clue suggested, seemed to raise more questions than answers. Were they traces of Roanoke, or remnants of later English expeditions? The uncertainty itself became part of the legend. By then, Roanoke was no longer just a colony that vanished. It was a mirror of America's beginnings. Ambition and fragility, hope and despair, forever bound together in the silence of an empty settlement. Today, the lost colony of Roanoke remains one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. Historians and archaeologists continue to search, but the trail has grown cold after more than 4 centuries. Modern excavations have revealed fragments of pottery, tools, and European artifacts scattered along the Carolina coast, yet none provide the final piece of the puzzle. Each discovery fuels debate rather than offering resolution. Some scholars maintain that the settlers were absorbed into the CROATOAN or other local tribes, their descendants hidden within generations of native communities. Others argue that the colonists perished in small groups, scattered by starvation, disease, or conflict. Without graves or documents, both possibilities remain plausible. Meanwhile, the legend of Roanoke thrives in culture. Plays, novels, television series, and even horror anthologies keep the mystery alive, retelling it through the lens of each new generation. The word CROATOAN has become a symbol, a single word that carries centuries of unanswered questions. What gives Roanoke its enduring power is not only the disappearance itself, but the silence it left behind. The settlers were not warriors or explorers. They were families, men, women, and children seeking a future. Their absence transformed them into shadows in history, a story defined less by what is known than by what is missing. 400 years later, Roanoke is more than a lost colony. It is a haunting reminder of how quickly human hope can vanish, leaving only traces carved into wood, carried forward by memory, myth, and mystery. The lost colony of Roanoke remains one of history's greatest riddles. Over 4 centuries later, no bodies, no graves, no answers, only a single word carved into a tree: CROATOAN. Were the settlers absorbed into tribes, lost to disease, or taken by something more sinister? The silence of Roanoke endures, reminding us that some mysteries are never solved, but instead echo endlessly through time.